Yeah, so this is a presentation on machine learning in the lithium-ion battery industry. I'll start with introduction. So, briefly about me, I work at a lithium-ion battery company based out of Delhi in India, and I have a background in machine learning and product management. Who is this talk for? This is essentially for people who work in the data sciences field and are looking to learn a bit more about the lithium-ion battery industry. If you're already, if you've been in the battery industry for a while, a lot of this information might seem a bit like basic, but it's all right. This talk is not for you. And yeah, caveat is that I'm a bit new to the industry, so some of the details might be skipped, and also that this talk is at a very high level. We are not going into details at all. So that is a bit deliberate as well. With that, let's start. Batteries. So, what are batteries? Essentially, it is a device to store chemical energy, and a device that stores chemical energy and then converts it into electrical energy wherever required. A typical battery has three main components: a cathode, an anode, an electrolyte, and then you can connect the load between the cathode and anode. Some basic terminology, like there's some confusion between terms like cells, modules, and battery packs or batteries. So cells are the small individual units, these cylindrical things or these rectangular things. You connect a bunch of them to make modules like this, and then you connect even these and then put an enclosure around them to make the final battery pack. So just wanted to make this terminology clear, because there might be some confusion later on. Although people use battery for cells as well a lot of times. So why are batteries suddenly cool? This is a good question. It's mainly because there's a massive electrification of the economy going on right now. So we are moving from a scenario where most of the energy, final energy, was in the form of oil or gas or coal, to one where it's going to be in the form of electricity. And as a result, the requirement for storing that electricity is going to increase many folds. And batteries are obviously the best solution to store that energy. There are other solutions as well, not conventional batteries, like storing them in hydrogen or storing them physically by, say, putting like carrying water to height. So there are a lot of other ways as well, but batteries are the most practical solution, at least for human scale things. So yeah, and just as a joke, I like to say electricity is the new AI, because we're moving back to a period where electricity is going to become cool again. Now let's move to lithium-ion batteries specifically, the subject of this presentation. So what is a lithium-ion battery? It's a rechargeable battery. So there are batteries that are not rechargeable as well, the kinds we use in our television remote. But lithium-ion batteries are ones that are rechargeable, and they have lithium. So lithium ions basically are the conductors inside the battery that flow from anode to cathode and back during charging and discharging. So what is special about them? These batteries were invented around 35 years ago, and they have since then mostly been used in electronic devices, like your phones, laptops. But now they've started to be used in cars and large-scale energy storage units as well. So one of the reasons is that the energy density has been increasing over time, and their energy density is decently high compared to conventional lead-acid batteries that were used in simple automotive applications. And they also have a decently high cycle life, and also a very high nominal voltage, and they don't lose capacity easily. And one of the important things is they have a very high Coulombic efficiency. By Coulombic efficiency, I mean the amount of charge that you put in and the amount of charge that you get out of it. So that is very high. typically for lead acid battery, you'll only recover 80% of the charge. For a lithium ion battery, it will be more than 99% in most cases. So that makes these batteries very valuable for applications where you don't want to lose charge, or like where you want to be more energy efficient. So what does all this mean? So there has been a rapid decrease in prices. From 2010, there's been around 90% decline in the price of lithium ion batteries. And usually we measure this price. This is a weighted average price from Bloomberg. And and we measure this in dollars per kilowatt hour. Kilowatt hour is your unit of energy. And we also seen an exponential increase in demand. And this is projected to continue till the middle of this century. So there's a huge, big industry waiting to explode in front of us. And that is why lithium ion batteries are so much in the news these days. So all of these are things that are positive. So what are the negatives? So one is safety, which is a very big concern. You would have seen that recent video of Tesla batteries catching fire in Australia. And then even before that, there was a Samsung Galaxy that was catching fire. So this is because they use liquid electrolytes, and these electrolytes are inflammable. And oftentimes, if the temperature of the battery increases, you can have cases where there's a thermal runaway, where the temperature keeps on increasing after it reaches a certain threshold, and the electrolyte can catch fire and lead to explosions. So there's a lot of stuff being done to address this. There's something called a solid-state battery that is being worked on. A company called QuantumScape recently raised more than $1 billion, or at a valuation of I think $5 or $10 billion, just to productize this technology that they've been working on for years, and they're still 5 years away from it. Apart from this, these batteries are also sensitive to temperature. So depending on the chemistry, at a very low temperature or at very high temperatures, the efficiency of these batteries reduces. The energy density of the batteries is high compared to other conventional batteries, but when you compare them to petrol, it's low, although they make up for it by being much more efficient in terms of so around 85% of the energy that's provided by a battery can be used to power the electric vehicle, whereas for petrol cars it's around 20% or even less. So the motors are much more efficient for in electric vehicles, but the batteries themselves are not as energy dense as petrol. So the calorific value of, say, petrol would be much higher. The amount of energy you derive from, say, burning 1 kilogram of petrol would be much higher than the amount of energy you would get from that's stored in 1 kilogram of lithium ion battery. So this is also something people are working on, and there's some effort being made to increase the energy density. It doesn't need to get to the same level as, say, petrol, but it needs to be at a level where it becomes more cost competitive even at an upfront level. Although this is more commercial details that we are not going to discuss here. The other main problem is aging. So this is something that requires a lot of machine learning. We'll get to it later. But so there are a lot of side reactions, irreversible reactions that keep happening within the cell, because of which the cell loses its capacity over time. And it's not apparent immediately, but over months or years, the capacity slowly fades away. And this fading depends on a lot of factors, from the charging current that you're using, to the temperature, to the number of times you're charging, to the number of times you're giving it rest, to even like physical factors like the amount of vibration or shocks that it's facing. And so this is a very big issue with batteries. So these batteries do last quite a while, but we would want them to last even longer. And because these batteries are quite costly and you make an upfront purchase of them, and even environmentally you would not want to basically recycling these batteries or dumping these batteries. So we would want these batteries to last for as long as possible. So aging is an issue, and then there are death is also an issue. So in aging, there's a gradual fading away of capacity, but there are also cases where there are metallic dendrites that grow within the cell that can short circuit the cell, leading to again explosions and fires. So those are also things that are encountered with these cells, and people are working to fix those as well. So yeah, these are the main issues with them, and I wanted to highlight them because a lot of the machine learning that is applied in this industry is to tackle some of these things. Now I'll give a brief overview of the entire industry. Yeah, so let's begin with metal extraction. So this is where your the material extraction. This is where your mining happens. First, you have to figure out the right place to dig your mines, extract them, and then refining happens. Then you get some salts like cobalt, nickel, lithium, graphite, or whatever other material you're using in your cell, followed by cell production, where first your anode, cathode, the different cell components are produced, and then these are assembled and joined to produce a cell. And then once you have the cells, you then move to battery manufacturing, where you get a lot of these other ancillary items like BMS, sensors, cooling systems, enclosure, wires, etc., and then assemble modules, and then finally battery packs, which go out into the market for the final application. Applications are in the automotive industry, which are most commonly known to people: cars, buses, scooters, even electric bicycles and trucks. But apart from this, lithium-ion batteries are also growing as energy storage medium for houses. So you must have heard of Tesla Powerwall, and also even larger operations like hospitals or buildings, and then again factories, and people are even doing it at a much larger scale at the grid level. So the Australia thing that I mentioned earlier. And then apart from this, they are also used for storing energy at solar farms, at wind farms, at telecom towers, and then again in the industry for operating robots and forklifts and cranes and stuff. So once this at the end of the life of this application, the batteries then go for like whatever they have to has to happen at the end of life. So here there are two possibilities. Either some of these batteries can be reused for applications that are not as energy intensive. So for example, a battery that was in Tesla, a Tesla car, can be reused to say run an auto rickshaw, because it won't have as stringent energy requirements. Or you can recycle the cells to get back the minerals, and then it will go back into the cell production step again. So this entire thing is basically part of this new emerging trend of circular economy, wherein you want a material that is once entered into the economy to stay there in whatever form as long as possible, just circle around it. So with this out of the way, we are finally going to dig into the machine learning aspects of this whole thing. So let's start with material extraction. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you would have heard of it, but there's this idea that lithium reserves are limited, or there's scarcity of lithium. That is not the case. Lithium reserves are plenty, but they are geographically concentrated in some places of the world, like Ecuador, Chile, Australia, and part of China. So a lot of countries don't have access to lithium that way and have to import it. But there are other elements that are used in batteries and are very crucial, but are actually scarce, like cobalt, which is mostly just found in Congo, and also nickel, which is not as scarce as cobalt, but is still quite scarce. So getting these minerals is quite important from a business point of view and even from a geostrategic point of view, because think of it like oil. Just as oil was important in the previous era for energy, these minerals are important today for the energy security of any country, and just for reducing the cost of battery production itself. If you have to import it, if you imported your minerals at a high cost, then your cells will be costlier and then you'll make less money. So it's important to basically get these minerals as cheaply and as effectively as possible. So there are companies that are working on this problem. There's a company called Goldspot AI, which has traditionally been working on finding gold. And then there's this company called Cobalt, which is funded by A16Z and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, amongst others. So what they essentially do is look at geological data and try to figure out the best spots where lithium could be present or cobalt could be present. And so they use a lot of different modes of data for that. So for one of the things that they do is send X-rays inside the earth just to get an understanding of the composition of the subsurface, and do it by basically through helicopter. So they'll cover hundreds of kilometers of area in one day, and then use this to basically train their machine learning model and try to hone in on spots that could be useful to dig. And this digging, even for exploration, is a very expensive proposition. So anything that reduces the search space is quite handy and quite useful. So there's something that they're doing. And as a rule of thumb, it's usually every 100 sites that you evaluate, one will be feasible economically. Like one will you can mine feasibly. So what these people are claiming is that they can reduce it by up to a factor of 20 using machine learning. So the kind of data that goes in includes basically your scans of the surface, and then old records. So there might be some sort of OCR involvement as well in downstream data processing, taking old records of the cross section. So earlier what geologists used to do was cut a section of the earth, get information about the different composition of the different layers. So all those records do exist. So they work at that level, and then they work at the level of the geological scans as well. So this is about material extraction. We'll now move to the next stage. So yeah, so before we move ahead into cells and batteries, there are some key parameters that I think you should be made aware of, or you should read a bit more about if you're interested. So these are terms that will keep appearing again and again. So voltage, I guess most of you know, but yeah, so every cell has a voltage. There's a rated voltage, and then there is upper cutoff and lower cutoff. And these ratings are given by the manufacturer of the cell. And then impedance is essentially the internal resistance of a cell. Capacity is the amount of charge that a cell can hold. Energy is the amount of energy that a cell can hold and can provide to the load that is connected to the cell. And then again, charging current, discharging current. C rate is something that is interesting, and it's a very industry specific terminology, but it's something that keeps recurring. So I would suggest going through this guide from MIT that gives a good description of all these terms. And if you want to dig a bit deeper, then this will be a good starting point for that. Yeah, so and some of these terms I'll explain later on as and when they come. So let's look at cell production. So first of all, discovering new cell chemistries is a big task in itself, and there's billions of dollars going into research into this, and uh, this is something that will make or break the entire electrification effort. So in this, there's a new rise of a new field called materials informatics, which is sort of inspired by bioinformatics. And so the idea is to essentially that much like genes, materials also have some sort of a genealogy and a property, and different materials have properties. And if you can basically uh, put this down in a database, there's a lot of analytical work that can be used, and a lot of that simulation can cut down on the experimental work. And this is essentially application of data science to materials research, and this is growing quite a bit. And a lot of this is still in academia, but there's a lot of this stuff happening in the industry as well. There are companies like Cuberg, which was recently acquired by Northvolt, QuantumScape, as I mentioned, and there are tons of other companies that are working on this. Although I don't think there's as much work on this in India, but we'll hopefully get there soon. As for datasets, so there are some large datasets available. So for example, there's this dataset of 133,000 or organic molecules. So there's some properties of these molecules that are mentioned, but you can use machine learning. So there's this research group at Cambridge that has used machine learning to determine atomization energies for these 133,000 molecules. So, and that is something that is required for any kind of application of these, for battery research or for any other use case. And yeah, so this is traditionally, all this was very computationally expensive, but machine learning helps us to sort of do that. And once we have this, then you can apply machine learning on that data to basically screen materials that are useful for battery production. So there's this one line of research where some researchers screen billions of candidates to find a good electrolyte for solid state batteries. So they trained the model on this large data set of 133,000, and then they use transfer learning to fine tune it on a smaller data set. And there's another paper on which researchers have done is basically try to find a set of dopants that can be used to stabilize lithium-based anodes. So lithium-based anodes are quite anticipated because they'll increase the energy density of cells much more than what we have right now. Currently, we use either carbon as anodes or carbon in the form of graphite, or silicon. Although silicon anodes are still not as popular. So this is something of a holy grail, and there's some further reading that you can go into when I share the deck. Cell manufacturing. So in this case, one of the most important things in cell manufacturing is finding defects, because even a small metallic particle inside the cell can essentially ruin the entire cell, and you don't want that to happen because there are literally lives at stake here. If a car catches fire, or if there's a critical application in, say, a hospital, you don't want the cells to go kaput. So essentially, what this one of the ways in which this is done is through X-rays, CT scans, and you can use that to detect whether there's a metallic contamination, if there's a welding defect, if the gluing is done properly, and a ton of other things. So there's this video from this Carl Zeiss group, and they build optical solutions, and so this will have some of the details on what they do. But there's also an interesting area of research which is sort of computer vision based. Yeah, now we move from cells to batteries. So this is the neck of the woods in which I personally work. So I could probably take some questions and answer things here based on my experiences as well. So whenever you manufacture a battery, the first step is to sort the cells into bins. So you because you don't want cells inside a battery which have varying capacities, and cell production is not always very consistent. So even if there is a cell, 18650 cell is probably the most popularly known cell. So even if you have 10,000 18650 cells, all of them will have significant variations in their capacities. They won't be the same as the rated capacity. So even if the rated capacity is around 2600 milliampere hours mAh, but you might see cells in ranging from 2200 to 2800. So if the capacity is say 2300, doesn't mean the cell is bad, but you can't use a 2300 cell with a 2600 cell, because that will lead to instability in the battery, and that can lead to premature death of the battery or some sort of thermal runaway or other issues. So what you do is you first do a charging and discharging test to get the capacities of the cells, and you have a few other metrics that you also measure, like the resistance or the voltages, and based on that you try to cluster similar cells together, so that your battery packs are more effective. So this is one of the bigger problems in battery manufacturing, and this is especially true in India because India doesn't have cell manufacturing yet, but we do have a lot of battery players, and each of them is struggling with this problem. So if you can build a solution around it that is effective and that is fast, then there might be a lot of takers for it. So right now there's a heuristic based approach that people follow. They do a charging and discharging test of a cell, and each and every cell. So suppose you have 10,000 cells, there are huge racks for cycling, and all these 10,000 cells are tested and then put inside a battery. So if there's each of these cycles takes more than 2 hours. So if there's a way to speed that up, that will increase the throughput sufficiently, like not sufficiently, significantly. So this is a good open problem that is also very practical and worthy of solving. And here there are people who are working on it. So there are some people who are working on ways to use novel inputs, like the impedance reaction to pulses of current of different frequencies. So instead of doing a full charge and discharge of a cell, you send currents or pulses, fast pulses of different frequencies, and get the impedance response to each of them, and then use those as features for a machine learning model, and see if you can basically cluster cells together. So there are other such solutions as well that people are working on, but there's a good open problem. And then once your pack is ready, there's this problem of key parameter estimation. So we'll start with state of charge. State of charge is essentially the level of charge in a battery as a percentage of its rated capacity. So it is usually expressed in percentages. Now the straightforward way to do this is to do something called Coulomb counting, where then you just take the current value at every millisecond level and integrate it. So the total charge that went in or total charge that went out can be calculated that way. But the problem here again is that the capacity of a cell reduces. So if you are using the original capacity, then you can't show the right percentage. And then there is also the problem of drift. So if you made a mistake once, over time, basically the charge will shift considerably, and then there's no way to basically get it back without doing a proper recalibration. You can think of this as an open loop problem, because there's no way to get a feedback on whether what you did was right or not. So this is again a very interesting problem to solve, and this is very important because one, you need to know how much more juice your battery actually has, how far it can go, and you need to show that to the user as well. And two, because a lot of other problems or other machine learning solutions depend on getting the right state of charge. So for example, if you want to say determine how good the health of a battery is, so you might run a lot of tests on it, but if you can't get the right state of charge, you won't be able to, your model won't work properly. So getting this right is pretty crucial to all the subsequent steps. Then your second key parameter is state of health. So state of health is mostly just a metric to which gives you a sense of how well your battery is compared to how it was originally, or how it ideally should be. There's no standard definition of it. Everyone has their own definition, but it's a composite metric of impedance, voltage, capacity. And one common way in which people in the industry use state of health is your current battery capacity as a percentage of the original battery capacity. So capacity here is measured in ampere hours, or basically the charge that your cell can take and give versus the charge that it could take and give in your in the initial stages when you had first got the battery. So this again is an interesting problem area to solve, because one way you can get this capacity is through charging and discharging the battery or the cell, but that will again require a couple of hours, because you want to charge and discharge at a low current, because the capacity varies depending on the current as well, and you would want to charge it at the rated current, which is usually very low. So that will take a couple of hours, and that's a lot of time. So you can't do it online. Let's say you want to get an idea of the state of health of a battery at this moment, or your BMS wants to do it at this moment. It can't do it through this method. So this is a very interesting problem, where how do you develop ways to determine state of health quickly and probably in an online manner. So this again is an area where a lot of people are working. So yeah, and this curve is the capacity degradation curve of a typical lithium ion cell. So whenever there's a new cell comes in, initially there is a steep drop in the capacity. This is because of what formation of what are called SEIs, or solid electrolyte interfaces, where at the anode there's some solid material that forms. But this is a good thing because it prevents the formation of future such material. So once that has stabilized the SEI, the capacity is more or less linear for quite a while, and then at the end it degrades very rapidly, and batteries are assumed to have reached end of life when they reach 80% of the original capacity. So yeah, I mean, till like 95% or 90%, there might be a very gradual decline, and then there will be a very steep decline. So this brings us to the other key parameter, which is remaining useful life. So this again is a very typical machine learning problem, where you have a, say, in some cases you will have a time series data of the history of the battery till now, and can you use that to predict how long the battery has to go? Or in some cases you might not have the time series data, and you'll only have data for, say, the 100th cycle of charge discharge, or 150th cycle, or you might not even have that, and you'll need to determine just based on your current instantaneous metrics how much more the battery can last. So these are again different problems, but solving the same thing, which is determining how long the battery has to go, and different data that goes into each of these cases. But each of these are problems that are very interesting and that are very crucial from a financial, environmental, and safety point of view. Financially, because say you want to give a warranty for your battery, or you want to give an extended warranty for your battery, so how much should you give? Based, if you have these metrics with you, you'll be able to determine that. Or let's say you want to you're buying back a battery, so what price should you buy back at? Or if you're going for a reuse, or you want to reuse these batteries, so where can you reuse these batteries? So all of these things are again dependent on how much more life the battery has, and this is a very important problem that way. Environmentally, because you don't want to dump batteries unnecessarily, so if you know if the battery can be reused, you will reuse it. And safety wise, because you don't want to use the batteries beyond a certain point, and if you know that the battery is reaching the end of life, there can be some safety implications, or it might start getting heated more, you might not be able to get as much power out of it, so it's better to replace the battery in that case. So there's this safety aspect. I've put one figure over here. So this paper for which has been very highly cited, data-driven prediction of battery life cycle before capacity degradation. So this is only for one kind of battery manufactured by one brand, LFP batteries. LFP is lithium ferrous phosphate, and these are one of the two most popular kinds of battery chemistry. The other is nickel, cobalt, manganese chemistry, the NCM chemistry. So here what they have done is they have the features that they have taken is the difference in the sort of log of the root mean square difference between the capacity at the 100th cycle and capacity at the 10th cycle as a function of voltage. So they have actually put it the other way around, but if you look at it, the function here is delta Q. So Q here is capacity. So capacity as a function of voltage, and then they find that this has a linear relationship to the cycle life when you take the log of it. So there are a lot of other such features that people are working on to make simple models, but people need to make simple models because we don't have a lot of data yet. So for example, this paper, they had worked on around 120 cells, which is not a lot, so they use a regression model. But if you can have data for 10,000 cells or 100,000 cells, and I guess companies like Tesla will definitely have that, then you can use more complex models as well. But this is a pretty interesting problem because the amount of data is humongous. Just imagine having a millisecond level time series data over 2 or 3 or 5 years, and for hundreds of thousands of batteries. So that is a huge scale of data, and then running a deep learning model on that. And this brings me to the next problem. So generating that amount of data is a huge pain. You can't run an experiment for 5 years, you'll be left behind, and you need results now. So how do you speed up these experiments? Because the search space is huge. You don't know how many different kinds of things can happen. So there's this exploration and exploitation trade-off, the typical kind of trade-off that exists in any kind of search space with multiple variables. There are people who are trying to work on optimal experimental design to cut down the time of basically making new discoveries in this field. So this is an interesting paper where they have used the learnings from the paper that I mentioned above, where you found that essentially this feature had a very high correlation with the battery life. So what people are doing in this second paper is they have taken a sample problem, which is finding the right fast charging protocol for a battery such that it doesn't cut short the eventual battery life. So if they had used the brute force method, it would have taken them around I think 1.5 years, and they would have to constantly charge and discharge their cells. But instead, what they did was they used something called a closed loop optimization method, CLO, which they have termed it as such, where they run a random sample of batteries on some random charging protocols for a fixed number of cycles, and they use that correlation to predict the final battery life in each of these cases. And based on this, they use a Bayesian optimization algorithm to select the next set of charging protocols to work on. And so this basically reduces their search space. And so using this Bayesian optimization, they try to balance exploration with exploitation. So what they have found is that instead of 500 days, they are taking 40 odd days to run the whole thing. And the results that they get are actually somewhat counterintuitive from whatever the conventional wisdom was. And they tally decently well with what is actually what they found using brute force on a smaller subset of those total charging protocols. So it's an interesting problem, and this is also a very generalizable method. They used it for finding a charging protocol, but it can be used for a lot of other things. But yeah, it does require you to first build this kind of a feature or have a early prediction model. So this is a one-time cost that you have to incur, and once you have that, then you can use those cells to do a lot of other lot of other experiments using this early outcome predictor and Bayesian optimization. And talking of charging protocols, let's move to battery management system. Battery management systems are essentially computers that sit on a battery.
Yes, I have one small question regarding the previous slide, regarding the battery life.
Sure. Can you just type it down? I'll take the question at the end if that works for you.
Okay, sure.
So let's come to battery management system. Battery management system is essentially a computer that sits on the battery, and it's connected to the battery via sensors and actuators. And the job of the BMS is to basically monitor the battery and monitor all the different parameters that I had mentioned earlier, like state of charge, state of health, or voltage, current, and also control the battery in case, say, one of the cells is getting overheated or it's lost a lot more of charge than the others, so it might not take current from there, or it might even do some balancing and move charge from one cell to another, or even the most basic things like when to stop the charging, or when at what voltage to stop the charging, or at what voltage start the charging. All of that is determined by the BMS. So it is essentially the brain of the battery, and every application has its own BMS. So cells are all interchangeable in a lot of ways, but you can't interchange BMSs. They are very specific to applications usually. Some of them are more configurable than others. Some are proper firmware where have firmware code where you can't modify them. Some are software BMSs. So that's a whole industry in itself. But yeah, so some of the roles and responsibilities of BMS includes cell protection, temperature control, power management control, networking and communication. So you can connect a CAN bus to it. You might connect some IoT device that will ping data to your servers, and then fault diagnosis, monitoring of each and every cell, monitoring the voltage and current, that you're not accidentally giving more current to a cell or less current to a cell, trying to maintain the health of each cell, determining the charging current and the discharging current, and essentially charging protocol as well. So let's look at some of these things. So fault detection. So the some of the faults that can happen is, say there's one of the cell can go over voltage or under voltage. So each cell has a rated voltage range, and you typically operate within that. But if there's a defect, then you might get voltages that are above or below that. So Sunil, can you just type down your question? I'll get to it. Hello.
Yeah, I'm doing.
Yeah. So some of the cells can be over voltage or under voltage. There are also cases. There's something called deep discharge, beyond which it's very difficult to recover the cells, where the cells, the state of charge goes beyond a certain, below a certain level. Then you have issues like lithium plating within the cell, which is basically a metallic plate that develops on the cathode of the cell. Then you have the dendrite formation that I had mentioned earlier, which can lead to short circuits. So BMS essentially has to detect anomalies in some cells if it finds that it's not behaving properly, and then either cut that cell off, in which case the capacity of the battery might reduce, but it will at least not catch fire or have basically some of the other issues, or you can raise an alarm, inform, do some predictive maintenance. So this is one of the tasks, and there's work being done on this as well. Then the other big problem is thermal management. So there are two main constraints. One is the battery temperature has to remain in a acceptable range, because the battery performance starts to suffer otherwise, and also battery life reduces if it's too hot or too cold. And the other is, but maintaining the temperature also has energy consumption. If you have, say, liquid cooled battery or some other kind of you're using some other kind of coolant, so there might be some energy requirements for that. And this is especially true for larger applications, where you have, say, a battery which is just a room full of modules, and you have a huge battery management system that needs to manage the temperature over there. So how does it do that? So it has to reduce energy consumption while maintaining the temperature. So these are the two main constraints here. And there's an interesting paper on supervised learning based thermal management, so you can check it out. And then there's this problem of battery scheduling. So typically in cases, this is quite common in cases where you have microgrids, like if you are at a home where you're say especially in places like California, where the electricity prices vary, and people also have solar installations at home, and they also have an electric car. So and they also have, say, a electric power wall kind of a thing to store electricity. So how do you schedule the charge and discharge of each of these different batteries that you have in your car and your home? And this depends on a lot of factors, like the variability in price. So you can probably forecast prices, and the price varies during the day as well. Variability in the load. So you know that at night your car will be stationary and you might not be using as much electricity as during the day. And also you might want to optimize for charging, but you don't want to charge it too quickly or too often to prevent battery life. And then obviously solar, if you're using solar power, then there's variability in that as well. So there are a lot of these factors that need to be taken into account. So this again is an interesting problem. And then we come to the issue of cloud BMS. So the problem with BMS is that it's on the device, and it comes with all the issues that edge computing has, which is that there's low storage, there's low computational ability, and it's often not possible to make any changes. So there's this new concept of cloud BMS, wherein you can ping data to a central server, and you can run much more complex algorithms. You will even have the past states of the battery, so you can use that to probably make more accurate decisions. And closely related to this is the idea of a digital twin. So digital twin is essentially a virtual representation of a device. This was popularized by NASA, where they were trying to simulate spacecrafts and have a digital version of them. But this is now quite common in the industry as well. So having digital twin of a battery means you have all the different state variables of it, and in real time you can basically play with them and understand what might happen next. And this Cloud BMS also has the benefit of basically being able to make decisions using inputs from multiple batteries. So if you have a fleet of batteries and you're using a Cloud BMS, then you can run machine learning on data from 1,000 different batteries and find out if there are any trends. Like if you were running, say, using two different kinds of vehicles, like maybe one from Yulu and one from Aether, and based on this you can find certain trends and see which probably works better for you and which doesn't. And there are 100 other problems that you can solve using this. So once the application is done and you reach the end of life of a battery, end of life is typically defined as a battery reaching 80% of its rated capacity. So what do you do at the end of life of a battery is a very important question. Although it's not as big at the moment, but it's going to become bigger and bigger. So if you remember, I showed you the graph where we are going to see an exponential increase in the number of batteries that's coming into the market, or the total market size. So that also means these batteries will eventually reach their end of life at some point, and you can't simply dump all of them in the ground. So what will you do with them? So there are three different ways to tackle this problem. One is reusing them. So as I had mentioned earlier, a battery that was used in a very high level application can probably be used for another application that doesn't have as strict requirements for voltage, power, or even say cooling requirements, or it doesn't require as much voltage. So for example, using battery packs that were used in four-wheelers in high-end cars like Tesla to run, say, three-wheelers. Although this sounds a bit common, but this is a good you might someday see auto rickshaws using Tesla batteries. And then the other option is to remanufacture them. So even when a battery reaches 80% of its end of life, not all of the cells inside it have actually reached their end of life, and you might find that a lot of cells are actually still in very good working condition at, say, 95% of the capacity, and it's only a few cells that have deteriorated and basically reduced the overall capacity of the battery. So you can remanufacture batteries. You just collect the good ones and use them to create a new battery, and then you can use them for, say, as replacement batteries for very similar applications. And the third option is when the battery has reached the end of life, even in its second or third application, and there's no more juice left in it, you recycle it to recover the same mineral salts that we had earlier, like nickel carbonate or cobalt sulfate or graphite and other such things. So what are the main challenges here? So one is assessing the degradation. How do you assess what is the level of degradation of a cell? So that is a big problem in itself. Based on this, you can decide what the application, if it is going for reuse or not. If it is going for reuse, what will be the application? And also then trying to bin the good cells together. So here there's another complexity. For new cells, you could use just the capacity and the resistance. But for used cells, you might want to use even more parameters just to be sure that there's nothing missing. And so there are ways in which people are tackling this problem. As I had mentioned earlier, sending those fast pulses of current. So that is one method that people are using to do a fast classification of these cells. Another is using X-rays to look inside the cell and look how much they have degraded. So this becomes a computer vision problem then. Obviously, it requires some domain understanding, but this is also something that people are working on. And so assessing degradation also requires data. So usually we don't have data right now because all these processes had not been kept in place till now. But there are companies to work, figure these things out going forward. So basically, a BMS that can track the battery throughout its whole cycle and also feed that data for a second life use case or for recycling, so that you can determine what can be done with it. So there are companies like Circunomics that are working on it, and I'm sure there are many more companies coming up. And so when we come to recycling, there are some more practical challenges. So one is dewelding of batteries. So whenever, especially older batteries, they were not made with recycling in mind, and even newer batteries, a lot of them are not made with recycling in mind. The main objective at the time of manufacturing is to have stable batteries that have high energy density, and that can basically provide enough voltage. So that has been the focus till now. But as the batteries reach end of life, we find that it's very difficult to dismantle them and to get the cells out of them. And it's a very labor intensive process and often uses a lot more energy than you can actually get out of it. So people are exploring ways to robotically deweld these batteries. And there's also some work going on in making batteries more recyclable themselves. And then again, you have the problem of cell sorting here again. So this is a different kind of cell sorting. So when you dump all the cells on a conveyor belt and for recycling, all these cells will eventually get crushed, and then they will be converted into a black mass that will pass through chemical reagents to get different salts. But if this dump that is going has a lot of impurities, and by impurities I mean things that are not batteries. So example, if you put your entire phone inside it, or there are wires, or there are other random plastic items, so that will reduce the yield. What will also reduce the yield is if there are batteries of different kinds that are together. So if you have, say, a battery that is based on an iron phosphate based chemistry and a cobalt based chemistry, and they are mixed together, so the yield of each will be less, and there will be impurities in both kinds of minerals. So very important problem in this area is to basically separate out batteries. First, remove all the trash, so just separate out batteries from the rest of the stuff, and as a second step, cluster batteries based on, say, chemistry or type. That is an interesting challenge. So one of these things you can do visually. So there are solutions for this where people use suction robots, and which have cameras, and they use computer vision to remove items that are not batteries from these assembly lines. And then there are there's a solution where you can essentially segregate batteries themselves into different bins based on their chemistry. So you look inside the battery using an X-ray or a CT scan, and you determine what chemistry it would be based on whatever spectral response you get, and then you essentially bin them. So there are there might be other ways to do this as well. These are the ones I'm aware of, but this is an interesting area of work as well, and this is going to become bigger and bigger as we move forward. Yeah, so once your battery is recycled, the elements go back into the processing process, and from there on into cell manufacturing or whatever other applications they might have, or they might be sold in the commodities market. So yeah. Yeah, so this is it. And there's something interesting that I found on the web, which was and yeah, so one of the things that has happened recently is that there's a, just like this was the case with machine learning a few years ago, battery research is hot and there are tons of new papers coming in every day, and it's very hard to keep track of what new development has happened. So I found this thing where someone had used machine learning to generate a summary of all the research papers as well. And you can check out the link. This is just a funny thing. And I've added some links for general reading. Yeah, so do you guys have any questions? Okay, I think there are a couple of them. Check them out.
You can find the questions on the chat.
Yeah, just a second. So Sunil has asked, let's say battery lifetime is 3 years and that depends on number of charge discharge cycles. So apart from cycles, there could be other reasons for battery life, such as cell death or material degradation. My question is, are people going that deeper in ML for predicting battery lifetime? Good question. So the main metrics that you get are current and voltage, and using that you get charge capacity, discharge capacity, and then you can get some derived metrics like Coulombic efficiency or capacity decline, and you have temperature and resistance. So number of charge discharge cycles is not the main reason because of which it happens. Obviously the capacity degrades with charge and discharge cycles, but when that happens you also see some variation in all of these other metrics. So the capacity starts to reduce, the resistance starts to increase, and if the temperature is higher you would see that the capacity is lower. So if a cell has consistently been in a high temperature condition, so the capacity might reduce over much more rapidly than it would in other cases. So people are definitely looking at all the different factors that affect capacity life and not just the number of cycles. And yeah, so this is an ongoing area of research, and so these are the main metrics we get, and you can put a lot of others if there are other kind of metrics that you think might be affecting battery life. You can put sensors on BMS, but that usually comes with a cost. So people try to derive those things based on these basic metrics like current, voltage, capacity. What Shashank has asked, what type of decisions operations are executed by BMS in response to sensor data? Good question. So there are two kinds of things that can happen. One is active and the other is passive. So to give an example, so for example, cell balancing is a problem wherein if one cell inside a battery has its current has its charge reduced much more than the other cells for whatever reason, maybe some extra current went out of it in one cycle. So in the passive case, what the BMS will do is it will just cut off that particular cell, and it will withdraw charge only from the rest of the cells till they reach the level of this particular cell, and then there's consistency, and it can probably resume withdrawing current from all the rest as well, like all of the cells. An active BMS might basically transfer charge from these other cells to that particular cell so that it comes to the same level. So this is one kind of response. In case, for example, say the temperature has increased quite a lot. So what it can do is it can reduce the current, the discharge current. So your cell might not give the same kind of power that it would at a lower temperature. And so that is why you will often find that at low at very low or very high temperatures your cars don't work as well. So that is because your BMS doesn't let your cells to give out the same amount of power as it would when the cells are within the acceptable temperature range. So there are a lot of other kinds of responses that the BMS can provide. It all obviously depends on the kind of BMS, and like a usual cheap hardware BMS which has all the code hard coded into it, it only looks at cutoff voltage and cutoff current, so that your voltages don't like basically stray out of the acceptable range. And similarly with the current software BMS, it's just a industry term. Software BMS is one that is programmable, and you can probably provide more complex instructions over there, where it will, if it finds that the voltage is increasing by a certain amount, it can even basically inform you through some IoT, or it can do some simple calculations and determine the state of health and inform you if that state of health has gone below a certain level. So there are a lot of other things that the BMS can do. Yeah guys, so is there any other question?
I think that's all the questions.
Okay, thanks. Sunil is join. I'll just wait for him to join again. Hey Sunil, so is there any other question that you have?
Hi guys.
Hey,
I was
hi,
trying
Sunil.
to rejoin, but I think there was some problem. I don't know.
No worries. So yeah, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I posted on the chat, I think.
Okay, yeah, so I had looked at, I think you were not there on the call. So there are obviously other factors that we look at when determining, trying to predict cycle life, and not just the number of charge or discharge cycles. So you have the main metrics that we have are current, voltage, capacity, and resistance and temperature. And you get this in a time series. You can measure it at a millisecond level or at a second level. But so you have this data, and then you can use these to basically predict the state of health of your battery.
Okay.
Hello.
What else? Like, so what are the other things people are doing currently in that area?
Okay, so
Like, what else they are trying apart from voltage? Because
no,
like
so
what
I said not just
whatever is
voltage. So you have so voltage will vary when you charge or discharge, but there is a range and within which it has to stay. So if the voltage reduces, and depending on the current, you would expect the voltage to stay at a take a certain time for the voltage to get down to a certain level, to that lower cutoff level, the prescribed lower cutoff level. So let's say you find that that is not the case and it's happening far sooner than that. So it means that there is some issue. So there is a curve, like a very typical discharge curve. So I'll just show it to you. Yeah, so if you look at this is one such curve where your voltage is as a function of capacity over one cycle. So you're basically just one discharge cycle. The voltage is varying like this. So here what they have done is they have looked at the 10th cycle and the 100th cycle, and they have found that the curve is different in the two cases. So this is sort of a signal that and what they then they have taken the root mean square distance between the two, and they have found that this is a good predictor of your eventual cycle life. So what this is, intuitively, this is a signal of the of the way in which the cell has changed. So if the cell had not changed, the curves would be more similar to each other. But if the cells have changed, it means the charge and discharge profiles are different. Even though the total capacity in this particular paper, they found that at the 100th cycle, the capacity was actually more than at the 10th cycle. And that does happen sometimes, like because of noise. But they could still predict with a high level of accuracy what the final cycle life would have been, even though the capacity had not started to drop. So there are a lot of so it's not based on one or two features. There are hundreds of features that you can use, and that is why you have machine learning, because these features give you different signals, and some of them are more predictive of cycle life than others.
Yeah. So this curve is standard for all the cells, all the new manufactured.
No. So
cells.
I had mentioned it. So this is only for one particular kind of cell by one particular company, A123 and LFP cells.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
this is also a very open area of research where not a lot of people have worked, and as I had mentioned, we only have 120. This particular paper is based only on 120 cells, data for 120 cells. So, and it uses a very simple regression model. So there's obviously a huge scope for finding something new here, and whatever you find will have very wide application in the industry.
Okay. One general question, like ideally, how long is the battery life? I lithium-ion based battery lifetime. How long is it in general?
So that depends on a lot of factors. One primarily is chemistry. So LFP batteries usually have a much higher cycle life than NMC batteries, but LFP batteries also have lower capacity. So if you just look at the total capacity provided, they are roundabout equal. And it also depends on temperature, and it also depends on charging and discharging current. So I can't give you a standard answer. For LFP cells, you can say it's something between 500 to 2000 cycles. But so there's this paper that I mentioned, degradation of commercial lithium-ion cells as a function of chemistry and cycling conditions. This has a lot of this data and plots. They have compared cells by 3-4 different manufacturers and varied by different conditions like temperature and charging current and depth of discharge. So this will give you a lot more data, and it's very difficult to find a trend there. There's no typical trend in any of these cases.
Okay.
And this is again only about cycle life. There's something called a calendar life or calendar aging, and that is very different because for if you are a Yulu driver, you might reach 1000 cycles within a year, and not 1000 cycles, but say 300 cycles, 1000 cycles in 3 years. But if you are using it for personal use, so then you might not reach 1000 cycles even in 10 years because you're only riding, say, 25 kilometers every day, and you don't need a lot of charge for that. So again, this life is only cycle life, and calendar life is much different. And a lot of other factors also start to come because there's some aging with time as well, even if you're not charging and discharging. So that also has an effect. But all of these are still under study because we don't have enough data, and all these batteries are very new. The entire industry is very new. So there is a lot of scope for figuring these things out.